Josh Heupel did actually say something illuminating yesterday. And Josh Heupel never says anything illuminating.
Good
because
work.
he said in Nashville that this is the deepest roster he's had since he's been at Tennessee. His exact quote was, "This is the deepest that a roster has been at any point. That's the front lines, O-line, D-line. That's our skill position players. You look at our wide receiver numbers, just pure numbers, we're deeper than we've been." Now, we all agree with that. I would have thought that anyway. But does the fact that Josh Heupel say it lend itself to what I've thought from the whole time, which is that he is 100% all in for 2024?
I think him saying it is an effort to breed confidence within his team, but I really don't agree with him on that. I do not.
Really?
I heard him say the wide receiver room is the deepest. Okay, I'll go with that. Is your quarterback room the deepest? When you had Hendon Hooker and Joe Milton? No.
Mhm.
Is your running back room as deep as it was a year ago? No. Is your offensive line deep with talent? No. You're still trying to find a starter. Is your secondary deep and talented? No. In my opinion, the two areas where I'll agree with him is the defensive line and wide receiver. Do you realize that Tennessee's only got 7 returning starters from last year's team? 2 on defense, and that's your deepest and most talented roster? I'm not in that camp. I thought his 2022 team was deeper, more talented than this one.
Wow, that's definitely up for debate, Caleb.
Jimmy, I disagree. I'm just going to say I disagree.
I figured that might be coming, so I just
Well, tell me where they're better.
Okay, so I'm just going to say this. Y'all think I'm crazy because I keep saying Nico was created and allowed to run Heupel's offense. So as good as Hendon Hooker was, I'm already saying Nico Iamaleava is going to be better at quarterback than Hendon Hooker.
I'm not in that camp either, but go ahead.
I'm in that camp. I think by default, Jake Merklinger is better than Joe Milton. I'm sorry. I'm sorry to say that, but I just think by default, Jake Merklinger is the better quarterback than Joe Milton. I actually agree with you about the running back room. Jabari Small and Jalen Wright, I mean, like, they're both gone. So the running back room is the one area I agree with you with. But I actually think the secondary is deeper. I think the secondary is better than 2022. You might have had me with 2021 when Alontae Taylor was still there. But I think this secondary this year, and again, a lot of this is projection. I get it. You're saying they're deeper based on proven talent. I agree with you on that. I'm going based off projections, though. I really do feel like I would take this defensive back unit, this secondary unit of the transfer guys and Jermon McCoy and Jacoby Thomas and the potential, I do believe, of Boo Carter. I would take that over the 2022 secondary because I thought the 2022 secondary was effectively air. I mean, Kamal Bahadin was horrible that year. He got better, but he was awful in 2022. So, and offensive line. So you had me with running back and offensive line. I got you. You got me there. I'm going to stand down on those two. I got nothing for you on those. Everywhere else, though, I think they're deeper.
Jimmy, apparently Josh Heupel thinks they're deeper in the secondary because they made no real effort to keep some guys that entered the transfer portal. And there was just a minimal addressing, I thought, of what they did last year. So basically, last year they're not very good, and this year they come into the season replacing everybody. Have you ever even seen anything quite like that?
No, they have lost 11 defensive backs from last year's team, all of their starters, and at least six have gone on to a Power 5 school. Now, does that mean Tennessee underachieved in coaching them? Or will they go to these other schools and sit on the bench? I don't know. And we don't know where Conyers is going to go. He's the most recent. He's the 11th defensive back. Now, 3 of those had completed their eligibility, and they're off to the pros, or at least going to try to make it in the pros. I don't know how the secondary can be any better than it was a year ago, although I thought the secondary last year was awful. I think it's going to be bad again. And if these guys are going to be better, and maybe these transfers will be better than what they had, but I've seen some other transfers come in, Andre Tarantino, who didn't look all that good to me. So I'm not sold on that group in the secondary. I think they're going to struggle again. I also think the numbers could potentially be skewed a little bit because Tennessee is going to be very difficult to run against. which means that teams realize, hey, we can't run on them, better throw it. So teams may average 250 yards a game throwing, plus Tennessee typically jumps out to a lead, which forces teams to throw as well. But I am not sold on this secondary at all. I don't think they'll be very good.
Interesting. Jimmy, as far as the statement, this is the deepest our roster has been at any point. Is Josh Heupel short-sighted in saying that because he raises expectations, or is he wise in that he stokes the NIL fires in Nashville?
Well, I don't know if it's related to NIL. I think it's related to engendering confidence within his team and selling tickets. Now, when you go the direction he did, what happens if you don't make the college football playoffs?
Well, then you say you're a champion of life and you get another year.
Well, how'd that work?
Last I saw them, they were on some canoes.
That's right. Does deliverance come to mind? But I think that I think Tennessee's 9-3. That's where I have them pegged. I have a hard time seeing them going 11-2, which is what they did a couple of years ago, and they beat Clemson in the Orange Bowl. I don't think this team is going to be that good because I see more holes in this team than Josh Heupel or Caleb sees with this team. Again, they returned 7 starters. That's it, 7.
There are a lot of projections that have to come through. If you just want to take 22 minus 7, that's 15. You need 12 or 13 of those projected players to be solid, or you're in trouble.
Yeah, and I'm even counting Brew McCoy as a returning starter.
Okay.
Who didn't even start half the games, but I'm counting him because he was a starter before he got hurt. But I'm just not as bullish on this roster. I see depth at several positions that I really like. I mentioned them before: receiver and defensive line, linebacker. Possibly, if they can stay healthy. But the rest of, hey, here's another one. Do you think they can be as good as tight end as they were a year ago? I don't. How are you going to replace Warren and Castles? They combined for 38 catches and 9 touchdowns? So I don't think they'll be as good as tight end either. I'm just not as crazy about this roster as some people.
Interesting. Well, go ahead, Caleb. Give us 30 seconds. Jimmy's Appearance brought to you by Varner Ford.
Experience it all at Varner Ford in Clinton. Need a quick fix or routine maintenance? Visit our Quick Lane Tire and Auto Center. Keep your Ford running smoothly with the experts in our service department. Ready for your next Ford? Our sales team's here to guide you through. 24 Ford Badlands Bronco, $59,829. 24 Ford Maverick all-wheel drive, $28,540. 24 Ford Explorer XLT four-wheel drive, $49,996. Local you trust, experience you can afford. Varner Ford, your East Tennessee Ford dealership.
All right, Caleb, we got to sell some cars first. Shoot.
So, Jimmy, I will bolster your point on this. And I want to draw a couple of parallels and give me your thoughts because you covered both of these teams that I'm about to bring up. Because every time I usually hear a coach say stuff to instill confidence in his team, it almost never ends well during the season. And I got 2 examples for you. And you tell me if you got any vibes of these 2 seasons with Heupel saying what he said. I remember Derek Dooley ahead of the 2012 season at SEC Media Day saying you're not going to have Tennessee to kick around anymore. So you remember that one, right? When he said that?
I do remember that. He was talking about Vanderbilt when he said that, I
think. And then I also remember heading into the 2005 season, Philip Fulmer was so worried about getting the Auburn treatment from 2004 that he went out of his way to make Tennessee as national of a brand as possible, including saying Eric Ainge has the same qualities as Peyton Manning as a sophomore quarterback. I remember that distinctly. Does Josh Heupel saying what he said yesterday, does that draw similar concerns to you of what Dooley or Fulmer did during those 2 years?
Not really. I think the 2005 season was undermined by, and I'm going to call it a fact, the fact that Eric Ainge got beat out at quarterback by Rick Clausen, and Fulmer started Ainge over Clausen. He opened the competition. Clausen had the better spring. He started Ainge. half the team on offense wanted Clausen, half the team wanted Ainge. I think that split the team. That was a preseason number 3 team in the country, by the way, that ended up with a losing record. You don't have any split at quarterback this upcoming season. What Derek Dooley said was just foolish, among the many things he said that were foolish. I don't have an issue with that. I do think that now if Eberle is as good as Hendon Hooker, Caleb, would you think he's better? Then he can cover up a lot of L's. I get that. I also remember that, and I do like this receiving core, but that receiving core a few years ago with Jalen Hyatt, Cedric Tillman, Devontae Payton, that was a pretty good group. So I don't think there's a danger of falling apart like those other 2 coaches did, which, by the way, for Fulmer, it kind of set the table for him to be fired because he had 2 losing seasons in 4 years. But no, I don't think this team will fall off the map like those 2 teams did.
Jimmy, I look at this team and I do go back to the culture, why I don't think they'll fall apart. And you said it to begin the segment, that they do have something good going there, and really don't see that going sideways anytime soon. I
don't either. Yeah, I think they'll be fine. I did see if I can address this quickly. Somebody sent in a text about if they lose Eberle, the season could fall apart. Is there anybody else where that could happen to? I'm going to give you 2 names where it could really go sideways. If they lose Dylan Sampson, who's really the only proven running back they have right now because of all the injuries to the others, and if they lose Cooper Mays. You remember what happened the start of last year when they didn't have Cooper Mays? And they went down to Florida and played ghastly. I think those would be 2 to watch for if they lose them that would really derail this season.
Okay, you mentioned Sampson. Those that are huge Heupel fans would just tell you, oh, no, that Cameron Seldon's going to be great, even though he's been hurt and even though I question his ability instinctually to run. Jimmy, so what are you hearing about? What do you hear about Seldon?
I hear he's a very talented running back, a good running back. He's got good speed, but he's got to stay healthy. Jabari Small battled health issues his whole career, didn't he? Over his shoulder issue. Peyton Lewis doesn't even go through the spring because he was injured. Those things concern me. If they can stay healthy, I think they would be okay if Sampson goes out of the equation. But I don't know if they can stay healthy. And they also like to have a 3-man rotation at running back. You take Sampson out, now they're down to 2. Probably. I haven't seen anything out of Khalifa Keith that makes me think he's going to be a good back. So I do like Seldon. I think he's a good back, but he's also unproven. So that concerns me a little bit about where they are. Sampson had over 600 yards. He led the team with 8 touchdowns. He averaged 5.7 yards a carry, I believe. I think he is a quality running back. Now, he does need to improve his pass protection, but I think he's a guy that could burst on the scene. I'm not saying he's as good as Jalen Wright, but I think he could be a 1,000-yard rusher for Tennessee if he stays healthy and gets enough carries.
Great stuff. Anything else? Go, Caleb.
Yeah, Jimmy, I wanted to ask you about this and this will also bolster your point to a certain degree, because this is probably the first team we see, and I know I'm high on Nico Imaliava, and I know we've had our debates on this, but this is the first team I've seen that's mostly Josh Heupel recruits. And I talked about Conyer entering the portal the other day, and a lot of the players you said that you believe made Tennessee deeper a couple of years ago, they were not Heupel recruits. They were Pruitt recruits, Pruitt signees, some even Butch Jones recruits. Mm-hmm. Is there still the concern to you that maybe one of the reasons they're thin is Josh Heupel's just misevaluating talent? I mean, this is the guy that thought Joe Milton was better than Hendon Hooker. So I'm thinking, how big of a concern is that? And does that lead to you maybe thinking they're not as deep as he thinks because he's not evaluating talent properly?
I think there are 2 areas where they've done a poor job of evaluating talent. Offensive line, secondary. Those are the 2 biggest concerns I have with this group. They have signed what I thought were some really good players. Addison Nichols comes in here. He's one and done. He's out of here. Why have they not been able to develop some of these offensive linemen? I don't get that. And I don't think Heupel recruited either Cooper Mays or Spraggins, right? In the portal, they got Campbell, and he's a nice player, but that was from the portal. So they have not recruited. They've not brought in very many offensive linemen that have jumped up and improved and developed into good players. The same with the secondary. And I remember a year ago, you really liked, was it Jordan Matthews in the secondary? Now, maybe he steps up this year. I don't know. Maybe Ricky Gibson steps up this year. I don't know. But my goodness, when you lose 11 players out of your secondary, now, in fairness, I probably should say 8 because 3 of them were done with their eligibility. And you're not any better than what you've been. And a lot of these players are going off to other schools, many of them at Power 5 schools. There's something amiss about your evaluation or your coaching in the secondary. So those are the 2 areas where I would really knock them as far as recruiting.
Okay. I want to throw this one last thing at you. I'm sorry to keep you long, Jimmy, but I want to get back to the original point, and that was, quote, this is the deepest that our roster has been at any point. Despite whether or not we agree with that, if you're Bill Martin, Tennessee's public relations guy, and Josh Heupel comes over to you and says, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to throw out deepest roster at any point in my career. That'll get people excited. If you're Bill Martin, you consider the expectations, right? What would you advise him at that point?
One of the deepest rosters I've had.
It's so simple. That's right.
And now, when you say one of, it's only the 4th roster, but at least you've covered yourself. Or I would say the potential to have the deepest roster. And again,
or just say, I love this roster.
Yeah, I agree with the receivers. I agree with the defensive line. I do think it's interesting that Caleb thinks Merkling is already better than Joe Milton. But here's another thought too. Didn't you think Hooker was much better his last year than his first year as a starter at Tennessee?
I did, but I also think the big difference was Cooper Mays being healthy his last year. Gave him more time to throw.
See, I think Eberle was not going to be a finished product this year. I think he can be better in 2025. So I'm not ready to say he's going to be better than Hooker, the 22 version of Hooker versus the 24 version of Nico. So, but Nico in 2025 might be that guy. I'm not ready to say he will be this year.